Hello everyone, welcome back to another Solo Spooky Story. My name is Rob and today I'll be your host. For those of you that aren't aware, the Solo Spooky Stories are shorter stories or cases presented by myself every other week where I'll talk about something that I find quite interesting or something that a listener has sent in to us as a suggestion or something that myself and Suze have both found that we just don't have enough content to talk about on a main episode. And, rather than letting it go to waste, we decide to put it into one of these instead. They're also a different format, just a one-on-one with me and you, where I just present a case and kind of give some theories on it, but mostly just kind of present it to you and then leave you to make your own decisions about it. But, with that said, I hope you're all having a lovely day whenever it is that you're listening to this. I'm personally loving the sun that's in Ireland at the moment. It's rare that we get it so consistently, so I'm absolutely making the most of it, just trying to soak up as much vitamin D as I can before it does inevitably go away and returns us back to the usual weather that we're used to. But, I hope you're all keeping well. We've had some cool things happen on the podcast recently. We have had some milestones coming up that we're very excited about, and we're trying to plan some more on-site investigations where myself and Suze will go out and actually look at somewhere or kind of explore a place like we did in Maynooth last year. So we've a few ideas in mind, but if anyone has any other suggestions, please do send them in to us. We'd love to hear about it. And yeah, with that said, let's get into this case today. So this is a really interesting case that I've known about for quite a while, and I've just been looking for the right time to really talk about it because it's a fun case. It's kind of a bit mental when we talk about the events that happened. But the, I suppose, Spark Notes version of it is that a group of miners, as in the prospecting miners, not children, basically were attacked by a group of big feet. I'm not sure the correct terminology there. Attacked by them. They shot at them and then ended up running away. That's pretty much the Spark Notes of it. There is a lot more to it that we'll get into, but it's kind of just one of these mad stories that I see a lot of people talking about online, but when you see kind of like articles and things like that talking about Bigfoot, you rarely see it mentioned. It's kind of talked about more so on like Reddit and things like that, but you don't see, like every once in a while you'll see like an article on like The Guardian or BBC or something like that where people will talk about like stories of Bigfoot or stories of Loch Ness Monster or whatever. You don't really see this story talked about too much, the Ape Canyon incident, and I just wanted to give it the attention that it deserves. So let's just get into this and just figure out what it all is, or try to at the very least. So this story today takes place in 1924 in the Pacific Northwest, and I suppose the cool thing about it is that the Pacific Northwest on its own is just a weirdly mysterious place. It's just this really, really dense forested area that, it just leads to all of these legends and tales and things like that, and it is itself a very like just spooky, mysterious place. And of course you would have stories of cryptids taking place there. Obviously Bigfoot being the main cryptid in this area, this is their territory, and yeah, today is no different. But I think what I like about this is that it's take place in the 20s, which is it's just a different time. Usually the cryptid stories that we hear about are from the 60s, 70s and 80s, so this is just something a bit different, and with it being in the Pacific Northwest, it just adds that extra layer of mystery. So Ape Canyon, which is the place that we're talking about, it's near or quite near actually Mount St. Helens. So obviously the landscape is quite different today than it was back in the 20s due to the eruption, but it's still a super interesting place. And it's this, I suppose, narrow gorge on the southeast shoulder of Mount St. Helens, and it's known for its fairly breathtaking landscapes, which a lot of the area is. But in the summer of 1924, this wilderness became the backdrop for an encounter that would go down in cryptid history, where a group of 5 gold prospectors, Fred, Gabe, John, Marion, and Roy, set out, as most people did at the time, in search for fortune, but ended up returning with tales of terror instead. And according to their leader, Fred, the prospectors had been working in the area for a while. They'd set up camp here in this kind of gorge, and they'd constructed this small cabin near the canyon to effectively serve as their base, because, they'll be kind of going out in different areas, going to different prospecting points, and they do need this kind of base of operations effectively where they can all meet back up and prospect their gold and things like that. I'm obviously not 100% on the mining processes for gold in the 20s, but I'd assume it's still a fairly complex and time consuming process. So as they dug for gold during the day, they'd kind of collect all their bits and pieces that they find, and then they'd return to camp and then rest by the fire at night. And this was going on for a while. They were kind of making some finds here and there, there. They were, getting more familiar with the area. And after a few nights while they were there, they began to notice strange kind of sounds in the area. They weren't 100% certain what they were, but I suppose when you're in the forest that long, you probably gonna get used to certain sounds and just knowing that they're either something that you can just completely ignore, or it's like a bear or some sort of animal that you're aware of. But you'd be kind of familiar enough, I suppose, with what you need to know. So anything that's outside of that is going to stand out to you. You're going to be aware of it. And these kind of strange sounds, they said that initially it kind of sounded like some sort of like whistling, or what appeared to be whistling, but they kind of passed it off as maybe like wind going through the trees or something like that. But then it turned into then this rhythmic thumping, and that's more difficult to ignore. So this kind of mysterious whistling combined with the thumping, it starts to put these prospectors on edge, and they're not really 100% certain on what they're hearing. And it definitely leads to a more cautious environment where they're not sure what they're dealing with. If it's maybe other prospectors that are in the area that are maybe messing with them, trying to get them to leave. If it's some sort of animal that they're not aware of, maybe like a bear or something like that, that would be quite a terrifying thought as is. They don't want a bear coming into camp, or bears. There's obviously like big cats as well, like mountain lions and things like that. So, like they're obviously very uncertain about what this could be. And, I'd say there's definitely a good deal of cautiousness and probably quite a tense feeling in the camp as a result. This then culminates in one of the miners, Fred, claiming that he caught this kind of like glimpse of a large human-like figure just kind of off in the distance. And he did not know what it was, but he was very certain that it was human-like and very large, that it was quite far away, but still was quite large. So he was able to tell that this was a big figure, big being, whatever it was, just due to its sheer size and with the distance, how away that it is, he was able to say that it was still quite big. So I can only imagine, the height of something that you're dealing with. If you can see it off in the distance and you still know it's a large figure, that must be quite a terrifying thing. And I suppose this is the earliest signs that their expedition was going to take somewhat of an unexpected turn. So one day, Fred and Marion, they were out prospecting, doing whatever it is the prospectors do, when they spotted what they described as this towering figure moving through the forest with a human-like stride. Now, this immediately makes me think of the famous Bigfoot footage that's out there, the Patterson footage, where you see what's supposed to be Bigfoot walking across this kind of ravine, and it immediately is just what I think of. And the creature that Fred and Marion saw was said to be approximately 7 feet tall. He said it was covered in dark brown hair and had pointed ears and stubby toes. And the two men just did not know what to make of this. It was a large creature basically right in front of them that they did not have any sort of concept for what it could be, any sort of reference point. And, understandably, they started to panic. So Fred, either acting out of fear or maybe instinct or stupidity, lifted up his rifle, took aim, and fired at the creature. And he shot the creature supposedly 3 times. And he claimed that when he shot it, that it actually fell off a cliff. And I suppose he assumed that that was going to be the end of it. But what came next would make them question their safety entirely. So the two men retreat back to their camp and obviously start telling tales of what they've just seen. They're reporting back to the 3 other guys there about what's going on. Clearly panicked. They've just shot this human-like creature. I would assume, being Fred, he's maybe not certain if he's just shot a man or, something else. I'd imagine there's a certain degree of panic going on right about now. And the men are clearly not quite sure how to proceed. Should they return back to the site and see if, they can help the man if it is a man? Or should they, count their blessings that they've dealt with this creature and hope it's gone? Or should they just retreat back to the town and, cut their losses here effectively? So while the men are back at camp, nightfall kind of comes around and they're talking about it. They're kind of getting a plan together, doing their usual stuff as well. They're still working, they're still prospecting. So they still have things to do there as well. And as the darkness begins to set on the forest, the prospectors are jolted awake by the sound of heavy footsteps right outside the cabin. They get up, they're listening, but obviously it's pitch black outside. They don't know what's going on. They can hear these kind of heavy footsteps, these heavy thuds, and this kind of rustling, but they're kind of not really too sure what it is. They're a bit uncertain about it all, and they're trying to kind of figure out how to proceed next, when all of a sudden they hear what sounds like the clatter of rocks striking the roof. So they hear these kind of rocks starting to hit the cabin, these large stones, and they haven't a clue what's going on. They're, as far as they're concerned, this is completely new territory. This is something that they've never dealt with before. And Fred, I suppose the leader of the group, afterwards says that many of the rocks fell through a hole in the roof. 2 of them struck me, one of them rendering me faint for nearly 2 hours. So he clearly like got clocked in the head with a stone. And, you know, I think the thing to take from this is these stones were either quite large and managed to like pierce through the roof of a wooden cabin, or it was maybe shoddily, constructed in some way and they weren't, particularly great builders or something, but it doesn't matter what it is. Somehow these stones managed to get through the roof and struck one of them in the head. So this goes on for quite a while then. The creatures who kind of became more visible then at this point were described as these ape-like men. They kind of emerged from the darkness and they appeared to surround the cabin. The miners claimed that one of them managed to force its arms through a gap in the logs and basically was like trying to force its way in. The prospectors then, they kind of like hit the arm. They said they hit its arm with an axe and it kind of like pulled its arm back out. Didn't cut it off, didn't seem to wound it in any way, it just kind of shocked it. They then went and grabbed their rifles and they started firing them basically off into the darkness, trying to ward off their attackers. Fred then says that the noise was indescribable. The hammering against the walls, the sound of footsteps, and the eerie howling made it impossible to tell just how many creatures there were. So this ordeal continued throughout the night for quite a while. At another point, the creatures again attempted to break into the cabin and were basically like pushing against the wooden structure, clearly trying to like break the door or break the wall. And basically they couldn't quite get in. Either the prospector shooting at them or, the construction on the walls was better than the roof. I don't know. Basically, it managed to be just enough that it saved the prospectors from whatever it was that waited outside. And allegedly kind of around dawn, when the sun started to come up, the creatures retreated and the men realized that they had survived the night effectively. So the prospectors emerged from their cabin and the scene was just total destruction. The walls allegedly bore signs of damage, large footprints surrounded the area, and they retreated basically as quickly as they possibly could. So they pretty much abandoned much of their equipment and they fled the canyon. And they basically got back to town and kind of told everyone there what had gone on. They said we've been attacked. It was these like ape creatures came out, attacked us, they nearly killed us. We managed to, drive them off, but we have no idea what it was, and basically talked about how lucky they were to survive. So this story basically caused such a local sensation that it actually prompted the US Forest Service to send out some rangers. So J.H. Huffman and William Welch were 2 rangers, and they were sent out to investigate. And Huffman and Welch descended into the canyon, and they claimed that they found absolutely nothing. They described how they saw these 14-inch long footprints found near the cabin, but they weren't convinced. They said that the footprints were there, but they said that they felt that they, were inconclusive. They demonstrated, I think, effectively that they could have been faked if they really wanted to be. They also claimed that the large stones that were found kind of lying around the cabin and having clearly damaged the cabin were potentially placed by the miners themselves, and that it was used to basically bolster their tale. So yeah, they kind of went back and reported on this, and it kind of divided people on this one then. So, the miners were saying no, this very clearly happened to us. We were attacked, and the Forest Service were like, no, you faked it, that's it. Now, I don't really know where we fall down on this, if it's either an elaborate hoax, if it's, some case of mistaken identity, like a group of people in the area, other prospectors attacking them and scaring them or something like that, or, maybe it is Bigfoot, who are we to know? But I suppose this whole story has kind of inspired many theories and speculation. And just to say that the miners themselves maintained for years afterwards that this did happen. It was true, and it did in fact cause serious damage to them, spook them, and made them leave. So, as I said, there's been a range of theories on this, and skeptics fairly consistently argue that the prospectors fabricated the story to gain notoriety, to potentially explain away natural phenomena, to potentially cover the fact that they were failing as prospectors, and that rather than admitting to the fact that they had failed, they made it seem like they were run off by these mysterious creatures. Or it could simply have been misidentified animals, potentially bears. That I did say bears at the start, it could very well have been bears, one large bear even, who are we to know? Or, as I said, potentially other humans, potentially trying to draw them out, run them off, or some sort of weird messed up prank. So that's kind of, I suppose, the skeptic theories. And then I suppose for the Bigfoot enthusiasts then, to them this represents one of the earliest and most compelling encounters with this creature. So the miners themselves kind of offered this unique perspective, claiming that the incident was this kind of supernatural sort of event that took place. Fred, the leader of them, he actually went on, I think later in life, to say that he thought it had like a spiritual dimension to it, and that these creatures were kind of these interdimensional beings that existed beyond human understanding. So kind of wading into, I suppose, the kind of like demons or spirits or something like that potentially attack them. I don't know about that, but it's something that I did see kind of mentioned a few times online. Who are we to know? And I suppose another theory that I did see online, based with the location of where it is, the kind of geographical area and how close it is to Mount St. Helens, I did see quite a few people actually saying that the prospectors potentially could have mistook volcanic activity for aggressive behavior. They said that these kind of natural sounds and movements in the ground or in rumblings and things like that could potentially be mistaken for the sounds of creatures moving in the forest, and that ultimately it would kind of leave a lack of physical evidence as well. Potentially some stones could, like they are in a canyon, and so some stones could potentially roll down from the top if there was some sort of like earthquake or tremors. That could have been what damaged them, and it just did spook them. So yeah, that's where we are. So it's been just over 100 years since the incident, and it's one of these, I suppose, cornerstones of the Bigfoot folklore. There's been, numerous stories about it online. There's been a few books, I believe. There's loads of online debates about it, and ultimately just kind of captures the imagination of those that kind of want to know more about it. Whether it's a hoax, misunderstanding, some sort of genuine encounter, it's a pretty interesting story, and it's very fascinating with kind of multiple layers to it. And I think probably the best way to conclude this is from Fred, the leader of the group himself. So he said, "People who disbelieve this story have simply not gone into the forest and searched themselves. It takes an open mind to see what it is truly there." I think that's a pretty cool perspective on it. This guy is pretty certain he knew what he saw, and as far as he's concerned, no one can convince him otherwise. Who are we to know? But yeah, with that said, I hope you've enjoyed this one. I love this story. I think it's just a really cool, interesting story with just kind of some mad stuff going on. I definitely love to hear what you think about this one. It's a pretty divisive one online, and it's a fun one to see kind of the multiple threads on Reddit, people really getting quite vocal about how they feel about it. But yeah, if you want to send in your theories to us, I'd love to hear them. You can get us on Instagram or Threads at the SpookyAF Pod. You can get us on YouTube at the SpookyAF Podcast, or you can email us at the SpookyAFPodcast@gmail.com. As I said, I'd love to see where you fall down on this. Do you think it was some sort of interdimensional being? Was it Bigfoot himself, or was it natural phenomenon that was just mistaken for creatures, or potentially faked? I'd love to find out what you think on this. But with that said, I hope you're having a lovely day whenever it is that you listen to this, and I'll catch you in the next one.